Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Yafeng Yim. I'm a professor and interim chair of the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Michigan. So welcome to the University of Michigan Building the Future Distinguished Lecture Series. In 2019, our department completed a strategic visioning process through which we identify 5 strategic directions. They are enhancing human habitat experience, shaping resource flows, adaptation, automation, and smart infrastructure finance. So our strategic vision reaffirms our value proposition to our communities and reinforce our commitment as engineers working in service to society. To highlight our vision and formulate our work plan, we launched this Building the Future Distinguished Lecture Series, which provide a forum to discuss each strategic directions. It's aimed to build a broad community network that includes industry professionals, researchers, educators, and students. Through presentation from leading experts and panel discussion, the series provides new insight and explore a range of perspectives on these 5 strategic directions. The direction covered by today's webinar is smart infrastructure finance. This direction leverages connectivity and infrastructure data to examine new financing instruments for public and private infrastructure investment. So we have a lot of support to make this vision and today's webinar come together. We would like to thank our co-sponsors for today's event: Integrated Roadway, Cornell Program in Infrastructure Policy, US DOT Center for Connected and Automated Transportation, MCD, University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute, the City of Detroit. I'd like to thank the Strategic Implementation Committee led by Professor Sun-Yung Lee, and Professor Lee has also agreed to serve as the moderator for today's presentation and panel discussions. So lastly, I'd like to thank Joyce Kennedy, Michelle Santayam, and Mark Kinnear-Snyder for providing technical and marketing support for today's event. A few more words on the accessibility of the webinar. I want to make our event accessible to all participants. So this webinar will have live automated captions. A transcript will be available. To choose a viewing option, click Live Transcript on the control bar at the bottom of your screen, where you can show or hide the subtitle or view the full transcript. I will now turn the session over to Professor Lee. Sun-Yung, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yafeng. I would like to welcome everybody participating in today's event. And today's distinguished lectures emphasize the strategic theme of smart infrastructure finance. So to give an overview of this theme, I would like to play a 2-minute video.
We're on the cusp of a major shift in how we fund and finance infrastructure. New digital business and financing models are unlocking data markets, resulting from the integration of sensors, 5G wireless, and edge computing. Smart infrastructure allows for real-time valuations of these assets, attracts efficient investors, and new public-private partnerships. Smart infrastructure finance is a meta-discipline that is taking advantage of the data that are produced from all these infrastructure systems and captures them into new financing models, very different from the ones that we've been using traditionally to finance our infrastructure. If you look at historically and currently how infrastructure is financed, everything is based on the tax base, the credit rating of the community that needs the infrastructure. What smart infrastructure finance does, it uncouples to some extent the financing of the infrastructure from the tax base that can pay for the infrastructure. The fact that we have data on infrastructure will allow us to actually better design and customize infrastructure systems based on the needs of specific communities. The engineer of the future will learn how to design infrastructure that is actually investable and can actually capture value for society and for the community.
During the lecture and panel discussion, I invite participants to send in your questions using the Q&A function. We'll try to get to as many of your questions as time allows. Now, I would like to introduce our very special speaker and panelists. We are very fortunate to have Tim Sylvester, founder and the CEO, Integrated Roadways, who will speak to us on the topic of the adopting digital infrastructure in a digital society, a financially, environmentally sustainable path to integrating intelligent infrastructure. The presentation by Tim will be followed by a panel discussion with our distinguished panelists, Rick Geddes and Tim Slusser. Professor Rick Geddes is Department of the Policy Analysis and Management at Cornell University. He is also founding director of the Cornell Program in Infrastructure Policy. Tim Slusser is the chief of the Mobility Innovation in the city of Detroit. So this brings us today's distinguished lecture. So now let me invite Tim to speak to this theme and give his presentation. Tim, it's yours now.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, everyone, for not only the invitation, but for the audience in attendance. I very much appreciate the chance to share this message with you today. A little bit of background about myself. I'm an electrical and computer engineer by education. I have about 20 years of experience in construction. And I realized a long time ago that connected electric and autonomous vehicles would lead to a merger of road networks and data networks into a hybrid system. And I started Integrated Roadways in order to deliver the products required for that transformation. So, we're a digital infrastructure technology developer, vendor, and operator. And a good analogy for us might be Cisco Systems, right? Back in the late 80s, early 90s, Cisco realized that there was a massive opportunity with the transformation of historical communications infrastructure from voice to data through bulletin board services and eventually internet service providers. And so Cisco created a lot of new technologies that enabled the development of data centers and data services. And now that's essentially the same thing that we're doing, except in the context of transforming that road network. So we, working in public infrastructure, it is a very collaborative field. It requires an enormous amount of expertise from many different fields in order to work. And so we always partner with the public agencies that own the roadways, that need improvements, the financiers contributing the capital, the engineers, fabricators, contractors, the entire supply chain. And our vision is to design, build, finance, operate, and maintain digital infrastructure networks that are embedded in and inextractable from public roadways, highways, interstates, and other surface transportation needs. So being a private company, we focus on where the demand is, where we can generate value in the shortest possible term. So right now we're looking primarily at urban areas in the top municipalities. And the idea is that what we're really doing when you're building a network, you're building a graph and it has nodes and edges. And so we're putting nodes of the network in high traffic intersections. And then later, as the data justifies doing so, connecting those nodes with continuous corridors as the network grows and demand for connected electric and autonomous vehicles increase. But why are we doing this? What's the point? Well, I don't know if you've taken a look outside lately, but our roads are in very bad condition and they're only getting worse. I was kind of surprised by this 2021 report because it was saying that basically 58% of roads are in fair or below fair condition. And now, if I remember correctly, back in 2018, that figure was more in the range of 43%, so having like a 15% increase in a couple of years is very concerning. And the reality is that right now, even in a generous view, about half of America's roads need replacement. And by the time we get to 2035, we're looking at 3/4 unless we do something. most of the service that we do is resurfacing. Now, I get that we are limited by the amount of investment available and the size of the network and the costs and everything. But in my perspective as an engineer, resurfacing a broken road that was built in the 1960s is like painting a cracked foundation. Yes, it hides the problem temporarily, but it doesn't resolve the problem. And even if you're looking at a very generous view here, we're talking about a backlog of greater than $1 trillion in 2021 dollars. Well, what does that mean for 2023 dollars, right? What does that mean for 2035 dollars? And so unfortunately, we've got this race condition where the growth of the backlog and the growth in the cost per unit, by the way, I should have said, road building costs have more than doubled in the last 15, 20 years. And we were expecting them to double again in the next 15, but just during COVID, we saw price increases in some areas of about 50%. So, you know, the combination of the size of the backlog and the cost per unit is really in a race condition to see who can bankrupt the United States first. And the thing about problems is that you can't fix them by continuing them. You know, you can't sober up by having another beer. If you have a problem that's a consequence of the way we've always done it, then more of the way we've always done it is not the solution. In fact, it's the reason that you have the problem. I have a cursor somewhere. Here we go. Okay. So even as the scope of the issue is increasing dramatically nationwide, cities have other significant challenges that they've never had to deal with before, such as the reconfiguration to work from home, disrupting property taxes, electric vehicles, eating up fuel taxes, online retail, taking sales taxes. Those are how public agencies pay for roads. So the problem is bigger than ever, it's more expensive than ever, and yet our stewards of the public good have fewer resources to tackle it. But we know that companies need data. The internet works on data. The physical economy works on data. That is an extremely valuable but underrepresented asset. But we also know that people need wireless communications, right? Cellular is not going away, Wi-Fi, connected vehicles, all of this stuff requires distributed antenna systems all throughout our cities. That needs edge networking. And all of these together are required to support connected electric and autonomous vehicles. But these are commercial value propositions. And I struggle with the idea that when public funds are so incredibly limited and so incredibly needful, that it makes sense for public money to pay for things that create a commercial value. And you also have to ask yourself, is the public agency, the owner of the underlying real estate, are they the right one to act as a managed service provider for all of these new digital services that are in demand? Let's be realistic. Our municipal governments, our state governments, they do not run our cell networks. They generally don't run our internet service. Only half of our power companies are owned by public agencies. So the commercialization of managed services is commonplace, and it's very uncommon for public agencies to operate them. But, you know, it's not just about finances, right? It's about sustainability in general. And so we can, in a way, thank our ancestors for leaving us with this unaddressed concern, because it gives us the ability to solve multiple problems at once. We need to concern ourselves with sustainability in construction. It is one of the most polluting activities that we engage in. And it's you know, multiple dimensions around the design, sustainable technology, sustainable materials, sustainable financing. And so, you know, one thing that concerns me about emerging issues with sustainability is we put all of this effort into mining cobalt and lithium and rare earth metals, and we're expecting half of new vehicles to be electric vehicles, but modern vehicles are often scrapped because of minor damages to their bumpers and so on. And so are we really going to go through all this effort to get all of these sophisticated materials and technologies and package them in to the most advanced moving objects that humanity's ever made, and then throw them away once they're in a minor collision, once they have a tree limb fall on their roof or something. So don't we need to consider how the sustainability of onboard systems for connected electric and autonomous vehicles relate back to the broader concern? And, you know, the way that you fix a problem is generally by just changing the way that you look at it. And the reality is the way that we look at public infrastructure has really not been significantly updated for like 100 years. 100 years. What that means is not only the people that came up with the way that we do it, they never sent an email. They never even watched cable television. They passed away before MTV debuted. Okay, so like, it's not just that the rules are outdated. It's that they're so outdated that they are verging on not being applicable to modern society at all. So like, think about this. Why is internet traffic a source of revenue, but physical traffic is an expense and a liability? If our economy is a product of our transportation system, how are you going to get food? How are you going to get clothes? How are you going to get construction materials? If our entire economy runs on public infrastructure, then why in the world is it so hard to keep it in good repair? It's perspective. It's how we look at it. Now, I am going to do some very sloppy math, but an average road is built for a million vehicles a year with about a 15-year life in asphalt. Okay, you're costing about $4 million per lane mile to build. And so if you switch your perspective and say, how do we get 25 cents for every vehicle that drives over this segment of road? The problem becomes a lot more solvable. And people have done this. They've been doing this. Spain started adopting public-private partnerships in the 70s because their government was broke. And, you know, it's come to the United States over the last 20, 30 years, but it's still limited to tollways and managed lanes. It's 0.3% of demand. You cannot put that on Michigan Avenue. You cannot put a tollway on Main Street, on Broadway, on Market Street. You just can't do it. Even if the technology supports it, the public will never tolerate that. Congestion pricing is generally only possible in extremely access constricted areas. But we have 100 years of lessons that we have not incorporated into public infrastructure. What if we treat it like a freemium service? It's free to drive, but if you want something more than driving, like your electric vehicle to charge, like your autonomous vehicle to drive itself, like access to the data, you have to pay for that, right? And so this gives a method for underfunded communities to improve services, to support economic development and the adoption of next generation mobility, and at the same time reduce their municipal liabilities, which creates a compounding virtuous cycle that allows them to reinvest elsewhere in areas that are more needful that cannot be reasonably taken up by commerce. So the way that I see it, we do that through digital infrastructure. But what is digital infrastructure? Well, you know, ask yourself, is this a phone or is this a computer? It's both. Digital infrastructure is the complete integration of different technologies that create a hybrid where neither element of it works without the other. We can't finance without the digital, but we can't put the digital in without the financing, and all of the other permutations of that issue. So when you pull them all together into a combined integrated system, you can't take them apart again. And this is the step that, in my opinion, was missing for the development of smart cities. What happened to smart cities? Where'd it go? 2014, it was huge. 2016, 40 million US DOT grant. What happened? Well, what happened was there was no business model. There was no financial model. There was no model to enable the adoption. It doesn't mean that we don't need the technology. You know, we need digital twins. We need advanced mobility. But we need a method to actually productively adopt it. And my opinion is that is not physical infrastructure in one place and then digital assets in another place. It is the hybridization and merger into a combined asset. We've done this. Integrated Roadways has delivered digital infrastructure in Denver. You're seeing one of our installations. It's in Denver, Colorado on Brighton Boulevard. I encourage you to go take a look at it if you're ever out there. You will not find it because it's invisible, because it looks like a road. That's the point, make it invisible. So our approach here is taking 100 years of proven technology and integrating it into a package that can be easily deployed in the roadway. I liken it to building roads as a Lego kit, right? And that's, you know, one of the reasons, one of the excuses that I use for my display here. But by turning it into a modular, factory-produced system, we're taking advantage of hundreds of years of innovation that have not broadly reached roadways. And we're also adding in things that have been proven elsewhere. Fiber sensing has been used since what, like the 70s in the oil and gas industry for remote sensing of pipelines, maybe not quite that far back, but the point is it's well proven. And everybody knows what an antenna is, I certainly hope. So like the only thing that we've really done here is taken this myriad of proven technologies and find a way to put it in the road so that the road can collect data, provide wireless, charge electric vehicles, and the combination of all of this allows us to support autonomous vehicles as a service, not as something in your vehicle, but as a service provided to your vehicle. And that creates revenue streams. And these are very large revenue streams. Not only are they large, but they already exist today. These are not surprises. These are things that people buy right now. Traffic data, again, go back to internet traffic data. There's great comparables there, but there's also traffic data that is obtained by a lot of existing market operators, public agencies doing traffic studies, GIS companies, real estate companies, credit companies, insurance companies, banks, so on and so forth. Outlets, look around, wherever you are, you're surrounded by outlets. We need outlets literally everywhere, but we don't have them outside along the road. And that was one of the most expensive parts of smart cities. So we deliver outlets and we plug Wi-Fi and smart city tech and other stuff. And all of this is supported by an edge data center. Now, you may not be familiar with that personally, but you use it all the time through your existing cell provider. It's an extremely in-demand technology market. One of the big problems, though, is getting the wireless and getting the edge into dense urban areas, because the public agency says, what's in it for me? I lose real estate, I got all these headaches, what do I get? Well, here, the game changes because you get the road, which is really the whole point of the matter. So alongside that, it supports the emergence of predictable but currently non-existent sources of revenue, like wireless electric vehicle charging, which is a luxury for passenger vehicles. It's a necessity for commercial vehicles for a number of reasons that are beyond the scope of this conversation. So all of these things have been demonstrated, they've been adopted, they generate billions of dollars of revenue throughout the nation. And we're just talking about combining them into a holistic system that provides all of it at once in a build once package that also gets you the road. And this allows us then to support all of these emerging needs like connected intersections, right? And what we're thinking here is we're currently in the process for delivering our next set of projects in the city of Lenexa, Kansas. And what we're showing them is a way to better understand their traffic data on a per intersection basis on an ongoing, current, and historical basis that is very easy to analyze. And that helps them with traffic flow management in practically every dimension. But it also provides all of the interstitial technology that's required to implement dynamic signal systems, which then further improve traffic flow, and everything that you need in order to do vehicle to infrastructure and infrastructure to vehicle communications. And all of this reduces traffic congestion, which means less pollution, which means less idling, less time wasted, less user expenses for delays. And another benefit that might not be obvious is that we can help reduce collisions because the in-road sensor systems do not rely on environmental effects. They don't rely on vision. They can see over the hill, around the corner, behind another vehicle. And they're a lot more robust and reliable than camera systems. People always say, oh, you can do this with cameras. You can do it with cameras. It's easier and cheaper. And I say, well, okay, if you can do it with cameras, how come nobody is? Oh, well, you know, excuses. So beyond that, this gives us the ability then to think about Roadway as a managed services platform in a generic environment, right? This is no longer a managed lane. It's no longer a tollway. It is a revenue generating asset that can be privately financed, that provides a financially self-sustaining, future-proof infrastructure asset that allows us to adopt more sustainable construction materials, methods, designs, technologies. Every aspect of this is improved. And the reason that we can improve it so dramatically in one fell swoop is, well, at risk of belaboring the point, for the last 100 years, not much has really changed substantially. So there's just an enormous amount that we can do that we haven't done. But thankfully, you know, finding a silver lining in all of the unmet needs that we have in society, thankfully, the fact that we're looking at replacing, you know, 50 to 75% of our infrastructure in, let's call it, over the next generation, gives us a really fantastic way to start the adoption now, prove everything works, it's viable, it's has limited and understood risks, it generates sufficient revenue for its needs, it delivers all the services that people require, and allows us then to prepare our economy and our society for all of the transitions that are going to happen over the next 50 years. Because if you think the last 50 years have been a wild ride, well, I'll tell you, the next 50 are going to be everything squared, right? But we know what needs to happen. We need new infrastructure. We need all of this digital infrastructure, all of this digital integration and transformation. And so, you know, it's a great time to start. The job's never going to be finished, but that's why we exist. That's why I organized this company, because we have the ability as society, we have all of the technology, it's all proven. All we have to do now is have the temerity to take what we know and integrate it into the roadways. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I really enjoy the chance to share my opinions and thoughts with you, and I really look forward to this panel discussion.
Okay, thanks so much, team, for your thought-provoking presentation. So let me make sure to invite Lee and team, our panelists, to start our panel discussion. Okay, thank you. So it was really a very interesting presentation, and particularly the role of the digital and further hybrid infrastructure for self-sustaining world, with a different perspective to look at our enormous infrastructure issues. So before going to the questions, the registrants were able to provide some questions. Also, we are going to solicit the question from the Q&A. But before starting the answering those questions, so let me first start with our panelists' take on the team's presentation. So, Tim Slusser, can you start? And then I will go with Rick Geddes. Tim?
Sure, absolutely. So for the group here, as was mentioned, I'm Tim Slusser, Chief of Mobility Innovation here in the city of Detroit. And honestly, these topics, this is why I love my job, right? I often argue with people, I have the best job in mobility in the best city in the country right now. So very, very fortunate there. But you know, what I heard Tim talking about was a paradigm shift. And specifically, you know, I love the context of the question, what happened to smart cities? Because Tim is absolutely right? What happened was there wasn't a business model. And so what we need to be focused on is how we rethink how cities can leverage these new solutions, because the rate of innovation is accelerating, right? Our world today looks far different than our mothers and fathers' world, you know, when they were our age. And then our children, when they're our age, it's going to be unrecognizable, right? My child is going to come to me and say, hey, Dad, I need you to help me with this. And I'm going to go, I can't, because I never had to deal with that. I don't even know what you're talking about, right? So, but government and these pieces of infrastructure have lagged. They've stayed constant mostly, right? And so we at the city of Detroit, we are looking at solutions like this to say the future road we put in should pay for the future road that replaces it. And so our goal is the next road we pay for is the last road we ever have to pay for. And that gives us a sustainable future, not just for our own infrastructure, but actually helps us unlock things that we can't do today. I don't have a mechanism today, nor does any other city that I'm aware of, to take this type of data and monetize it. That's part of what we need help with. There's, in some instances, there's laws preventing us from doing that, or structures preventing us from doing that. This conversation is helping to start change that so that we can think differently. So I'm going to stop there and give Rick an opportunity to weigh in as well. But thank you very much for having me.
Great. Rick?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Tim, for a terrific presentation. Very interesting. Maybe a little background. So I'm a professor in the new Jeb E. Brooks School of Public Policy, but I have a joint appointment in the Department of Economics here at Cornell. So I come at this sort of from a regulatory economics perspective. And Tim has given a very interesting and thought-provoking talk. So I'll just make a few quick points and then go to Q&A. But one question is about sort of, as I think about the implications of this, which are obviously profound and very important to be able to charge for the use of the road, essentially, through data. In this case would be sort of how does it affect the economic structure? And this gets to one point that Tim made about the government is of some sort, state or local, is still going to own the road itself and own the right of way to the road. But we think in economics about competition versus monopoly and reasons for, you know, continued government ownership. And one is the notion of natural monopoly, where you want one big provider, you know, provided versus smaller competing firms. And one of the things that this Tim's talk made me think of was some writing I did on passenger rail, where passenger rail, you can think of the tracks and the gantries and the right of way as having natural monopoly characteristics, but the operator who has the kiosks and actually operates the trains as being basically a competitive service, where you either bid out the right to serve for a certain number of years in a concession contract, or you actually have competing providers on the same right of way. And so I know the United Kingdom has done some of this. I know Richard Branson's Virgin Rail has done some of this. So that just struck me as an economic model. I don't have the answer, but that this drives the policy, right? So I'm automatically thinking about the policy. The other thing Tim's talk made me think of was some work by one of my intellectual heroes was David Levinson, who was at Minnesota engineering for a long time, wrote a paper called Enterprising Roads for the Reason Foundation, talking about how roads could be made more like private businesses, really, and be made more efficient because of that change in the way we think about the market structure of providing that critical service. And he was talking about state DOTs at a higher level, but Tim's talk made me think we should go back to some of the writing that David Levinson did. The other thing that Tim's talk made me think of, I have an advisory board for my CPIP program. And next week, one of our board members, Bob Hellman, who runs United Bridge Partners out in Mountain View, California. You know, it's a private equity fund, but they actually have private bridges and they operate those, they're toll bridges, but they actually very much operate those bridges as a commercial service. And so we could, and of course, many people on this call know that the Ambassador Bridge that goes across from Detroit to Canada is a private bridge. So we can look at some of these currently unusual entities and see how they operate, and can that give us guidance on how the policy, we obviously want policy to facilitate innovation and not to hold up innovation. And so we want to think about, you know, structures that will have that. I guess I know I want to be brief. One thing is just a question to Tim about the panels. That one of the problems, so I wrote a book on PPPs. I know you talked about public-private partnerships in your talk, is, and one knock on PPPs is technological lock-in. You had future-proofing in there, which is very good. And I wonder the degree to which the panels would allow technology to adapt, or whether you'd get some technological lock-in with this business model that you have. I do not know the answer to that. I'm going to conclude with one issue that I would take with your talk. As an economist, one of my heroes is William Vickery, who was at Columbia Econ for a long time, won a Nobel Prize for his work on congestion pricing. And he foresaw that the problem was we couldn't charge for the use of the road. You know, and you said tolling is in his day, everything was mechanical. You had overhead gantries to charge for the road, but now we have these. And these can charge down to the sub-meter level in the X, Y, and Z space for the use of the road in real time. So I have to give a plug for a paper I have in Nature with Peter Crampton and Axel Okenfels on how a real-time network-wide road pricing system would work and how it could alleviate traffic congestion. However, Tim, your point about the political pushback is very well taken. And you know, another person I follow is Kara Kokelman at UT Austin Civil Engineering Department, who has written a lot about how to address those problems. So I guess, you know, the way I kind of view it is charging for the use of the road is charging for the use of the road, whether it's an actual toll or whether it's using the person's data. So I guess I'll make a plug for the good old fashioned economist microeconomics 101 of charging a marginal price that varies in real time. So I'll stop with that. Sung-Kim.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. Tim Sylvester, do you want to kind of a little bit respond to the
Yes, I would love to, and thank you for the opportunity. So Rick, you bring up some great points, and Tim, you as well. And I've taken some notes here, which you guys might have noticed. But one of the advantages of the modularity of the system is that it is intended to avoid that technological lock-in. Because when you're doing an improvement or a replacement, you're not talking about replacing a very long span. You're talking about replacing the individual elements that constitute that span in whatever means is most appropriate for your objectives. And on top of that, inside the road, those outlets, we have 4 of those outlets using the current design in every slab of pavement, which is typically about 10 feet long, 12 feet wide, which means throughout an improved roadway, you have thousands of places to plug in new things in a hidden, invisible, protected manner. And that means that it's going to take a long time before all of those outlets get filled up. So we got a lot of options there. Most of the operational systems live in the roadside control center that provides the edge networking assets. And so the internal technology can largely be hot swapped as information tech improves and advances. So I recognize and respect the technology lock-in and the need for flexibility. And then moving on to Tim's question about cities monetizing data. In my view, that is the same issue that we have with cities running municipal fiber networks or running, commercial wireless communications and other things, and that, the municipality may lack the tools, the capacity, the knowledge, the expertise to do it directly, but what they can do is provide a concession to the operator, and then that operator, can do whatever needs to be done, and then manage it that way. And so I know I'm leaving out a lot of specificity here just due to time. Another item that I wanted to point out, Rick, that economics is near and dear to my heart. I may be an engineer and entrepreneur, but I often think like an economist. And what we do is we run an open access network, right? This is different from the monolithic networks that you saw with cable and with cellular. And with an open access network, you separate the network operator from the service operator. And so in our model, every cell company would be accommodated, every Wi-Fi company. We may be delivering a specific type of wireless charging, but our goal is not to operate the wireless chargers. It's to provide those chargers to the existing charge network operators so that their service can be extended. And we would like to think that while not perfect, it does help reduce the concerns that people have around natural monopolies. One last note, and then I'll be quiet. I know we have more questions, is that your comment about real estate is incredibly apt, because that is exactly how we think of it. We view the roadway like incompletely used real estate. It's not empty, of course, but there are better uses for that road. And instead of having a physical tenant consuming square footage like you have in traditional real estate, you have a digital tenant consuming services.
Thank you. So we're getting to more about all the points that we just talked about, but I think the first thing is we really need to talk about its policy implications. So let me direct this question to the league first. So from a policy perspective, what are some of the impediments, like financially or otherwise, to drive the adoption of the digital infrastructure to improve funding and financing of our public asset?
Yeah, thanks, Hyun. So that was directed to me, right?
Yes.
Yeah. My first so what Tim, in first day of class, when I teach a class on infrastructure policy, is I have the students separate the funding of infrastructure from its financing. And I talk about how the policy of funding mechanisms like tolling, gas taxes, diesel taxes, registration fees, on down the road, mileage-based user fees, road usage, all that is separate from how you finance, which is how you generate the large upfront payments that you need, the fixed costs, as an economist would say, to install the infrastructure and do design and construction in the first place. So that's the first thing. So here we should keep that in mind. What Tim is proposing is a funding mechanism. So his and he's absolutely right about smart cities. The funding, the underlying funding mechanism was not there to install but what he's saying is with this module, with all the things he laid out in his PowerPoints, that could generate the funding. The issue then becomes using the financial markets to bond against that. So the degree to which Wall Street, right, is going to rate the debt associated with the installation of this new technology, allow you to bring that value forward in time to make the changes that Tim is talking about. How expensive is that money going to be? In other words, what's the interest rate on the debt? That depends on the debt rating. I would imagine these would be revenue bonds versus general obligation bonds. We could get into the whole, structure if you wanted to talk about PPPs more, as Tim brought up in his PowerPoints, which I love. You would create an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, that's a legal entity that has legal personality separate from, to insulate the other companies that are involved from any risk. And that thing actually has equity in the SPV separate from the debt. It might be 80-20, 80% debt, 20% equity, but that's capital that you raise in the financial markets that would allow Tim and his company to install this stuff in the first place, which is not going to be cheap. So I think we'd all agree on that. So that would be my quick answer. I could talk about a lot more, but it's going to depend on those financial markets in an intimate way. But this is project finance on him. So this is project finance, and there's a whole world of that at the big banks.
Right. Also, the financing and the funding mechanism has been the kind of the continuous topic from our earlier Building the Future seminars, really particular for this one. So this is very
and there's a lot
important issue to differentiate them. Yes.
Yeah, but let me just say it would not be different from a toll bridge or a toll road or a airport or a seaport or a water system. In other words, the financing structures for these pieces of infrastructure is very well developed and well understood. So it's not, I don't think we'd have to innovate on the financial side to do this initially, although it would evolve over time in its own world. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Tim Sylvester or Tim Slosser, do you have anything to add or regarding this, the financing or funding impediment?
I mean, I do have a lot to add. I don't want to take away from Tim Slusser, though. I know I've been talking a lot. I don't wish to dominate here.
Okay. So,
All right,
okay.
sure,
so-
I'll jump in. So I'll just add, right? So my background, I'm not an economist, right? And so the financial aspects of this are a little bit outside my domain. But what I do know is, right, the question you posed was around impediments to driving adoption, right? If I'm going back to the core of the question. So from the standpoint of a local government like mine, we are making changes to move at the rate of innovation, okay? We don't want to get left behind anymore. And that becomes, honestly, taking on additional risk, right? We have to be comfortable with making some changes that expose us to some additional risk. And so I think in a scenario like this, with what integrated roadways would be proposing and putting that technology out there, it then becomes the objective of the city, in my opinion, to bring in the next level of technologies and solutions that can plug into and play off of that roadway to drive additional adoption. And adoption isn't I'm using the roadway. Adoption could be I'm leveraging the roadway. I am a sensor company that's plugging into one of those ports. I am a data company that's leveraging the data that's coming out of this and paying revenue into the system, right? Whoever owns it, whether that's city owned, it's privately owned, it's a partnership, right? But it is to our advantage to be part of that process because we are the regulators. We are the ones that define what the uses of the roads can be, what can be and not be in the public right of way. We define something like a surveillance ordinance that we have in the city of Detroit that helps protect our citizens from unfair surveillance practices, right? So all of these things are at the local level, and we have to participate if solutions like this are going to succeed over the long term. So,
okay. I have also question to Tim more about the your role on the mobility innovation in Detroit. But let me just have one more question because we are talking about policy, and then I will get back to you. So, Rick, as a follow-up question, and like equitable and just access to our infrastructure is very important, and that also cannot be separated with the kind of the policy. So how do you incorporate equity into the infrastructure policy? Your some opinion about it?
Yeah, so that's a great question and huge. And infrastructure right now was a big issue when the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was passed November a year before. And so one of the things I always go back to with that question. So I study network industries and regulation. I studied postal service, electric power, and so forth. This has been an issue for literally centuries in the provision of network infrastructure. The earliest example I can think of is postal services, mail services, where we didn't want any community left out of the delivery of physical mail. In the early days of the United States, that was a way of keeping the union together, was actually delivery of newspapers to what was then considered the frontier states. And so the idea was that every community should have mail service. It was mostly horses in those days. Then, of course, go down, the idea was every community should have access to roads. In other words, transportation. And then there was a farms to markets movement, which the farmers had trouble getting their produce to market because those dirt roads would become flooded and rutted. And then it was paved roads. Every community should have access to paved roads. Then I'm old enough to remember landline telephones. Every community should have access to landline, some, maybe not in every house, but some communications, landline telephones. With President Roosevelt, it was power. It was the rural electrification movement and the notion that it's equity, it's fairness. No society should be left out of electric power. We should all have that. We could go on all afternoon with clean water, wastewater treatment, everything else. We're in that world again here, where the idea is that every community should have access, and access at affordable rates. And the idea is that there's certain basic needs that communities have. Mobility is one of them, transportation is one of them, that we consider to be the building blocks of a good and fair society. So I would put that in the context of this discussion that's been going on for a long, long time about about open access and of every community to a certain minimum standard. It's not just to any sort of a road, or any sort of telephone service. It's a minimum standard. So I think that ancient debate in network industries is coming back, and we should, borrow from that. And that I think is embedded in this. Now, there's other things going on with infrastructure, where the construction of the interstate highway system. I'm sitting here in Ithaca, just south of Syracuse, where I-81 cut the city of Syracuse in half, basically. And so we need to rethink those layouts of the interstate highway system, which is as we reconstruct roads that are falling apart anyway, we might as well do a better job of it. So that's a slightly different issue, but there are these issues in ensuring that every community has a certain minimum level of service. So that'd be my quick answer.
Thank you, Leah. It's very great. Good to hear from you. Now going back to the Tim Slusser, I think we have been talking about some of the roles of what you have been doing. So the Michigan became the first state to give a private companies the right of way to integrate the digital technology for like a mobility innovation, for example, wireless charging. So and apparently monetizing the data and the insight. So you shared some about the benefit that you see from such digital infrastructure. Maybe you can a little bit concisely talk what is your main motivation for that digital infrastructure. And then I will go with some specific questions about your Detroit strategy. But first, what is your municipality city's point of view that the benefit of the digital infrastructure?
Yeah, so thank you. And this is a really, really exciting project for us. So what's happening is Michigan Avenue, which is one of our major thoroughfares here in the city of Detroit, is being completely reconstructed. And two things are happening at the same time. Number one, we're laying induction coils in the roadway as we rebuild it to provide wireless charging, both static and dynamic. So when the car is parked, as well as when the car is driving. And then in addition to that, we're actually dedicating center lanes for transit and autonomous vehicles, okay? And so, to speak very briefly on it, because there's a lot that I could dive into here, we are trying to test a number of different things, including, when autonomous vehicles are truly ready for prime time, right? We want to have the first platform for those vehicles to be operating 24/7. So if you think about autonomous vehicles are going to be electric, right? And electric vehicles need to recharge. And autonomous vehicles don't have to have an operator on board. And in this scenario that we're creating, we could, in theory, have those vehicles operating 24/7 without ever having to leave the roadway, right? So that's something we're truly excited about. But in addition to that, one thing I'll point to, we are in the business in the city of Detroit and in my office of trying to solve business models, right? We're not doing technology pilots, right? When I took this role about 18 months ago, the first thing I did, I told the city and I told my team, I said, we are not doing any technology pilots. I won't approve any, I won't be a part of any. We're gonna do business model pilots. So that's really what this is, right? It comes back to everything that Tim said in his slides and Rick has been talking about from the economic side, right? So we are trying to understand how the roadway can become an asset for different vehicle classifications and use types. Think UPS, FedEx, and Amazon on the delivery side, right? They are currently building it into their business model to pay parking tickets, right? So how can we rethink our curves as part of this initiative and create spaces not just for them to pull off so that they don't impede other traffic, but also to give them the opportunity to then charge their vehicles so they don't have to go back to their depot and charge again, right? Because they're gonna have to convert those to electric as well. So that becomes a revenue opportunity. But then thinking a little bit further, just sticking on the charging side of this, now, if I think about passenger vehicles, it's a J1772 plug. If I think about transit buses, it's an overhead fast charging solution. If I think about heavy duty vehicles for services in the city, such as a refuge truck, right? It's a DC fast charging solution. I can continue to go on. And in most cases, these things are not going to share the same infrastructure with a plug-in style solution. But with wireless, we have an opportunity to identify if we can figure out the right business model to make this work. I now have a solution that works for every single one of those platforms unanimously. And now I've simplified the infrastructure problem and further made value for this roadway, right? And again, that's just the charging aspect of it. What Tim is proposing is beyond that. And so those become, to me, additional layers that we could be looking at. So, but for what we're doing in Detroit, we're the first for a public roadway to have this type of infrastructure. And we're really, really excited about it. So we're inviting a number of different types of companies to come down and test on this. And you know, if there's other companies out there that you're aware of, please tell them about what we're doing. I'd love to talk to them.
Great. And as a follow-up question, so how what you are doing in the city of Detroit feed into the broader Michigan innovation strategy in the mobility? Also, the one question, related question that I got from the participant is that they also, one of the person asked question about like a cabinet project in Michigan, how your view on it. So.
Yeah, so the CAVNU project is the AV lanes elements of this, right? And so CAVNU's model is they're also infrastructure, but they're more imaging infrastructure. Think, you know, perched over where the traffic signals are in a bird's eye view of the roadway, right? But they would essentially come in and offer a similar type of the service, you know, to manage the vehicle operations in that roadway for the connected, you know, types of classifications. So, you know, that is another element to this master plan, if you will, for what this road of the future could and should look like. Remind me, what was the first part of that question?
So like all the things that the city of Detroit, how can it fit into Michigan
Yes,
innovation mobility strategy? Yeah.
Yeah, so the city of Detroit, we want to be a leader both in Michigan and nationwide, right? And we want to be an ally and a big brother, big sister, if you will, to our other local communities here in the city, in the state of Michigan. So we want to champion a number of these initiatives, and then we want to share our best practices, our lessons learned with the state of Michigan, which is helping to fund a lot of these initiatives, by the way. So thank you to them. And you know, then get that information to our other communities in the state. So I don't want to spend too much time because I know we're coming up here in the end, but that's really kind of the role that we're trying to step into here in Detroit. We're in a position to take risk and to you know, lead in some of these new policy initiatives. I would point to our recently passed Transportation Innovation Zone. I don't have the time to talk about it right here, but I would advise everybody to look it up. But you know, those are some of the things that we're doing that, again, we see as models that can be shared with our other communities here in the state of Michigan.
Okay, thank you. So we already time is up, but we still have a lot of questions left, but I will just finish up with one more last question, going back to Tim Sylvester. So you are like an entrepreneur, and as an entrepreneur, how do you envision the U.S. position to move toward the digital road, like what Europe and UK are aspiring to? So what is your take on it?
Yeah, well, I think that at this point, the level of demand that we have for transportation infrastructure improvements, the level of demand that we have existing or predictable for connected electric autonomous vehicles kind of takes the optionality away, right? We don't really have an alternative here. We kind of have to do this. The exact method that we use is to be determined. You know, there's a lot of unknowns, but I think what we can all be very confident about at this point is that we really don't have a good alternative.
Great. Rick and Tim, do you want to add something? This is the last question. So at a final, just sharing.
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay, Tim Slusser, do you have anything to add?
I would just echo what Tim said, right? You know, we're quickly approaching this, you know, realization that the options are pretty limited. And if we want to have, you know, healthy, safe infrastructure, we're going to need to identify alternative methods than the current to fund those. So, yeah.
Great. Thanks for sharing the yours. And this is like a cohesive message that we are getting from the speaker and the panelists. So with that, so thanks everybody for attending. So please let us know, particular participant, what you thought about this event by responding to short survey in chat box. We are adding a link right now. Also, please visit umservice2society.org to explore our strategic directions. Also, please visit our new CE LinkedIn page, where you can find more information about strategic direction and departmental activities. Having said that, again, thank you so much, team Slusser, the Rick Geddes, and then team Sylvester. Thanks for, and also thanks for all the participants.